It feels like they're trying to state that the Jets were in the wrong the entire time. Like, you see them doing bad things, and you see how the film kind of criticizes it to an extent. But it's such a small extent because there are no repercussions for them in the end. Like, the ones that suffer the most are the Sharks. Like, they lose everybody, and then, like, Maria loses her innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so much lost for them that it just outweighs anything that the Jets could be feeling in any way.
Hey, it's Kristen, and I am so excited to be joined by my friend Josie Marie of the Film Posers. This is our first collab. I'm so excited to talk about West Side Story with you. And I think we're going to have a really cool conversation because we're both Puerto Rican. I think we also have our own, different backgrounds as well. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm from New York, but I've never been to Puerto Rico. And I know you just moved from Puerto Rico to New York.
They're both parts of the spectrum of the film.
Exactly. I'd love to hear from you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and Film Posers, and also maybe your first experience with West Side Story before we get into the film.
My name is Josie Meléndez, also known as @the_Josie_Marie on Twitter. And first and foremost, screenwriter trying to make it into the industry, and also just a Puerto Rican film critic trying to bring more attention to Latinos and Caribeños making films and trying to get the work done. But as for Film Posers, it's a nice little project between me and 3 more Boricuas where we talk about film and television from our cultural perspective and just try to add a little bit more sabor to the film critic scene. So that's mostly what we dedicate ourselves. Also support women in film.
Yes, absolutely.
And for West Side Story, my first experience I actually saw in 8th grade, the 1961 version, because we were studying Romeo and Juliet. And my English teacher was like, guys, look at this. And I remember the first time I saw it, I didn't love it, but it did bring me some sense of joy because I'd never heard Puerto Rico or Puerto Rican in a film. So it was like that in the Heights quote, I'm like, little details to remind people we're not invisible. I felt seen. It's a small island, so you feel clustered. You feel like the rest of the world is the rest of the world, and Puerto Rico is Puerto Rico. So for West Side Story, it was the first time we were on the map. But then as I got older and I got to college, and I studied at the University of Puerto Rico, so the way they interpreted, because we had an entire class dedicated to dissecting West Side Story, and I was like, maybe this isn't the best thing out there. Definitely switched my perspective. So when this new film was announced, because they started pre-production in like 2014, and then 2018 they started filming. So it was like around that time I was in college. So a lot of conversation was revolving around that. And Spielberg even had a town hall at my campus where he came and he spoke about how he wanted to improve on the story and how he was going to consult a bunch of Puerto Ricans and people from academia that are Puerto Rican on our culture and everything. So generally, it's been a lot of concern.
For me, I remember in like elementary school seeing West Side Story for the first time at my cousin's house. I remember we were very young to the point where like my aunt called my mom to like double check that we could watch it because, it is a very dark movie. And I feel like that actually may have been one of the first like musicals I ever saw like on screen. But I didn't really have like a lot of thoughts then because I was, so young. I was just like, oh, wow, a musical. And I've always loved the music, but I feel like the more that I like dive into West Side Story and I'm exposed to it, the more things that just like, I guess don't make sense to me. The movie is out. I think right off the bat, we know that Rita Moreno is coming back for this, won an Oscar for this role, was the only Puerto Rican in the original film. And unfortunately, that whole film, they were in brownface for. And then we have Ariana DeBose, who is Afro-Puerto Rican. Amazing representation there. But then the rest of the cast, I think we kind of have just like Latinos in general. Rachel Zegler, who's Colombian and Polish. So for you, what was your thoughts on like some of these performances and some of the cast and how they kind of went about it for this new iteration of West Side Story?
I was very nervous about it going into it. Coming out, I can appreciate a lot of the performances. There's people like Ariana DeBose. There is Ana Isabel, who is apparently like Puerto Rican royalty when it comes to musical theater and everything. And I just found out about her because of this movie, so I feel very ashamed. But she's in there. Spielberg has said in various interviews that 20 out of 30 of the sharks are Puerto Rican. But one thing to note is that most of them are background. So that is still a detail that we have to pay attention to, because this is being promoted as a Latina film, a Puerto Rican film, but we're still in the background. So a lot of people aren't happy about that. At least I can say the reason I wanted to watch was because of Ariana. She was the best performance. Her and David really carried that film. Their interactions, their chemistry. It was just, I believed it. It's the same thing that happened with Rita. I mean, Anita is a winning role. It's a star role, even if it is the supporting actress nom. You can tell that everything that comes from what she says comes from the heart. There is that connection there to Puerto Ricanidad that I felt was missing with Rachel as Maria.
Mm-hmm.
And at times, I think I wasn't as drawn to Rachel's interpretation of Maria, but that could have been that for some reason, I didn't find there was a lot of chemistry between her and Ansel.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think she definitely carried it. And I agree with you that I don't think that Rachel and Ansel had good chemistry. And I think it was a lot of him. I feel like when you hear the songs that Tony sings, this guy is like looking for a miracle. He's like so like ready for a big change in his life. And I felt like Ansel was so stiff. And there were times where I was like, I just want to see him like, be free.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are definitely maybe reasons why his character can't be, because his character, they changed a little bit of the background of him. He has more of like a rougher background, I would say, than they had in the original film. But even still, like he just seemed so stiff. He seemed like he was, the wrong guy to be cast as Tony.
The first time they meet, I actually thought that was cute. It was very well choreographed. I thought their little banter about height was kind of adorable because she is so small compared to him. But after that, it kind of went away. And I wish we could have held on to that more, because they were truly so overshadowed by Bernardo and Anita.
And I mean, this is such a small thing, but every time he sang, it was just like la 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 la, and I like couldn't stop watching, because everyone else was like just smooth, but every time he opened his mouth, it was just like the jaw was.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, because I remember when we left the screening, someone was saying, yeah, because he kept trying to do the vibrato with his chin instead of like actually using like his tongue and like those techniques that they teach you, and he just kept focusing so much on his chin, and just his entire face would shake.
Yeah, so it was a little distracting getting into like some of the musical numbers. I think to me, West Side Story, the music is really what's so beautiful, and I think what people love so much about it. I mean, there are definitely some lyrics that don't work, and I think they tried to fix that in this. But I think overall, like, the music is what you kind of take away from this story that is just like so freaking depressing. Like, nothing good happens for any of these people, but especially for the Latino people in this story. But the best moments was seeing like the whole combination of like the choreography and the costumes and the cinematography kind of coming together in all these big musical numbers, like America.
So that was one of the things that one of my theater professors actually brought up to Spielberg during that town hall, which was America. Like, if they were thinking of changing lyrics, which Stephen Sondheim was on set, and he ended up changing the lyrics for America, which was a lovely surprise. Because I remember one of the things that she brought up was, when people leave Puerto Rico, they don't leave hating the island. Most of the times we leave because we have to, because of the conditions. Because it's so hard over there right now to make it in any industry. And that was the case back then. People would leave. Like, the best example is La Carreta, which is such a wonderful play, which is everyone leaves for opportunity, hoping that eventually they will come back. So the original lyrics of America, wishing for Puerto Rico to sink back into the ocean, weren't as genuine or as accurate. And that also comes from the fact that the original musical was supposed to be between Jewish and Irish Catholic gangs. So that changes the interpretation completely. And I'm blanking on his name right now. Kushner?
Mm-hmm.
When he was at the town hall too, and what he defended for that scene was that usually back then, between those two backgrounds, when people left, they were like, oh, thank God we left. We're going back to new opportunities. Like, forget that old place. So it came from pride and anger. But for us, it's more like a bittersweetness and some sadness when we leave Puerto Rico. So they tried to change that. So they did listen to that, at least at the town hall, because clearly they did change the lyrics, and it changes the way you view America. Because I always like the way that it does criticize where they are. There is the women that are praising where they are now and like new opportunities, and then the men always bringing them back to reality. Like, it is a little bit better, but there are still, like, there's discrimination. We are treated less than. So America always did have at least that sense of awareness. Being able to change those lyrics really makes me happier to be able to appreciate that awareness in the song. Because before it just felt a little bit crude and insulting. And that's why so many people don't like the musical, because most of the music doesn't sound Puerto Rican. The lyrics were written by Sondheim. So he's not Puerto Rican.
Yeah, I mean, literally the people that made the original musical and that made this film, it's all white guys. It's great that they listen to certain things. But I mean, imagine how different it would be if, like, someone who was actually Puerto Rican wrote the music and things like that. Like the authenticity that would be in there versus having to change things to, reflect more accurately the people that you're trying to represent. And I think that's a great transition to just get into that representation of Puerto Rico, because I do feel like at times watching the original and watching this one, I know that they tried to change some things, but I can't help but feel that, like, we're just kind of lumping in all Latinos into one stereotype.
Yeah.
Especially when you know that, like, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Like, the people that are from Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens. There were lines in there that they threw in of like, oh, wait, aren't they part of the United States?
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, whatever. And it's kind of like, okay, that just, I mean, I get that they're showing that, like, prejudice of, like, they don't care. It's just like, if you're, brown, you're brown. We don't care. But at the same time, it does feel like we're like, all right, well, all these people are the same, right? Oh, you're brown, you're an immigrant. Oh, you're Puerto Rican, you're an immigrant, right? When that's not the case. And so that's something that I feel like watching the film, even though they tried to fix some of those things, it still, like, frustrated me. And I'm curious for you, because, you are from Puerto Rico. Like, how do you feel watching something like that?
I can identify maybe a bit with that perspective of Anita, where she's like, oh, things are better. But then you get that culture shock, and then you start seeing, oh, we are lumped together, because that is the reality. I remember when I was doing my master's degree, like, winter break was about to start, and someone asked me about my visa, and I'm like, I am a US citizen. Why are you asking me about my visa? So there is still that prejudice and that ignorance towards Puerto Ricans and our relationship with the United States, which is one of those things where I guess that when we have movies like this with someone as influential as Spielberg, we hope that starts a conversation. But seeing how it's been going and how press junkets have been going and how people are talking about this film, they are promoting it as a Latina film. And it's not really bringing awareness to our situation, which, of course, is not to make everything political. But I mean, you included Pedro Albizu Campo in the film. You included La Borinqueña, the revolutionary lyrics, which were outlawed in the 1950s by the party that was currently in government. Like, we can't, to this day, we cannot sing those lyrics without being doxxed and, like, carpeteado. I remember I was there when Ricardo Rosselló left office, and we sang those lyrics in front of La Fortaleza. And it was genuinely a moment of community. So that was the only moment I cried watching the film, because hearing those lyrics, we're not allowed to sing them. And the fact that Spielberg was given this opportunity to put those lyrics on screen was kind of bittersweet, because it came from someone that isn't from our culture. And again, that was erased from our history. I didn't know those lyrics existed until recently. So it's just seeing those sort of things that bring you pride, but also that bitterness. And it's very bittersweet, better yet said, because it's not entirely bitter. Because I did feel joy hearing those lyrics. I did feel happy. But also, it's, again, that thing that it didn't come from us. And it's sad, because that just speaks a lot to how Puerto Ricans are treated when it comes to popular media. It can't come from us. It has to come from someone else, which also falls a little bit into that white savior complex.
You said you could get doxxed for that, but then there's
Yeah.
a little bit of like that privilege of like, well, this is Steven Spielberg, so we don't have to worry about that,
Yeah.
right? There were some things also that I felt like they added to this movie, adding to like a Latino stereotype, like the fact that in the original film, you know, we don't see them, but Maria and Bernardo have parents, and she says, oh, like,
Yeah.
she says to Tony, like, you have to be quiet. My parents are sleeping. They're gonna wake up.
Papa.
And in this one, it was like, okay, well, we need to make it the most struggle you can possibly have.
Mhm.
You know, she had to take care of her dad since she was 6 years old. He's dead. I tried to go back and watch a little bit of the original one to be like, was this exactly, the same dynamic? And there were certain things that it felt like, in the original film, they had that dynamic of the Sharks versus the Jets, like they were antagonizing each other. Whereas in this one, it really just felt like the Jets were just going after the Sharks, just trying to, come into this already established Puerto Rican neighborhood and like cause drama. Then you have that Maria and her brother don't have parents now. They had this whole struggle. Her brother, dying. Anita getting raped. When I look back at it, I'm like, are we like putting exorbitant like pain on these Latinos?
Yeah, because mostly what Spielberg tried to do, which I wish he had explained a little bit more, because I think that for me, since I had a feeling someone had told me that this was going to be what the film was going to start with, which was the Lincoln Center plans. And I had recently studied it. So for me, it was easier to catch on, but they just show the plans and then they go into San Juan Hill and everything. And maybe for some people that don't know about that, it'll be harder to identify what was going on. But it was definitely one of those films where he tried to make up for the past mistakes of the first one and establish like, hey, Puerto Ricans were being pushed out of this community to make way for Lincoln Center. And then that forces the Jets to retaliate because, as we see, it used to be an Irish neighborhood. That actually also reminded me of In the Heights when Nina's father is talking about like, oh, this used to be an Irish community and like this building used to be Irish. It just speaks a lot to how everything in New York was one, then the other, and it kept continuing to change because of gentrification. So in that aspect, I wish maybe he would have described it more, because then it just felt like what you were saying, like, let's be sad for these people because they're being pushed out and now they're being antagonized by this other group that was also pushed out. And it was just a lot of mentioning and dropping little bits of cultural context without actually giving the context, and just putting a bunch of band-aids on things that were from the first film to try to make up for those like past sins.
Now that you say that, I don't think it worked, because I was in Lincoln Center watching this movie and everyone was clapping that we saw Lincoln Center. And I was like, I don't know if that's what's supposed to be happening right now.
Because it was San Juan Hill, and then San Juan Hill, all these people got displaced because of Lincoln Center. So where you are, like every time I walk over, and you see that huge West Side Story billboard on the side of AMC 13, you're like, huh.
Like, oh, ironic. The Anita scene when she goes to Doc's, already a horrifying scene, where she gets basically raped. And I remember reading that Rita Moreno had said back then, like, she kind of thought that that's what helped her get the Oscar, but also that it was a very like traumatizing scene to film.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know why, but I didn't think that they were going to do it in this movie, or I thought that they would do it in a different way. And instead, I feel like they took it and made it even worse.
Yeah.
Because they still kept that scene, and then they included the Jets girls screaming, no, no, and locking them out. And like those girls were trying to help Anita. And I was like, are we trying to like traumatize everyone even more? Like,
it was worse because you're emphasizing how bad it is. That doesn't happen to the nurse in Romeo and Juliet. So I don't know why Anita has to go through that, especially because they mention her skin color, they mention her background, they call her names. And it's just not only violence against a Puerto Rican woman, it's violence against a Black Puerto Rican woman.
Clearly, in Romeo and Juliet, there were ways to tell the story without having to resort to that. So why is it that, we get a beautiful Afro Puerto Rican woman and we need to not only make this scene happen, which, it did happen in the original film, but make it worse.
Yeah.
And that's where, some of those things, it just feels like we are just trying to make it like extra terrible for these Puerto Rican people.
Mm-hmm.
Was that necessary? I don't think so. I feel like there's
No.
other ways to tell the story.
That's the scene I hate the most from the original. It
Yeah.
makes me very sad, especially when you see Rita Moreno's doc and you hear how she felt, because she went through so much abuse in her career trying to make it in Hollywood. And like that and the movie that she filmed with Marlon Brando, like she classifies those as her most traumatizing moments on camera. So it really says a lot to how she came into the scene, because it just feels like what she hoped someone had done for her before.
Even when she comes into the scene, I don't know. I guess I was hoping
it was too late.
Too late. Like I was hoping that something would happen, that there would be like repercussions. And it felt like she just like did like a slap on the hand and was like, "Don't do that again." That
Wag the finger and
I'm
keep
like,
walking.
"Where's the police? Where?" Like, and I don't think it was. I think that they attempted to fix something there, and instead made it way worse, and then still had no repercussions.
Yeah, because you're trying to. It feels like they're trying to state that the Jets were in the wrong the entire time. Like you see them doing bad things, and you see how the film kind of criticizes it to an extent, but it's such a small extent because there are no repercussions for them in the end. Like the ones that suffer the most are the Sharks. Like they lose everybody, and then like Maria loses Tony, and like she loses her innocence. And there's just so much lost for them that it just outweighs anything that the Jets could be feeling in any way.
Something that people have brought up a bunch is the accents in this film. I mean, they're not really that great. They're really not.
No. The way Puerto Ricans talk is so specific and so different to how other people talk. And that is not something you can easily mimic through an accent coach, which is what Spielberg defended during that town hall where they were talking about, hey, we speak a certain way. Like people make fun of the way we speak, like in Spain and other countries. So what are you going to do about that? And he was like, I am very specific about accents. I'm always very peculiar. And it's just very interesting how it turned out, considering he was so adamant about getting it right. I don't know how it was for you. For me, it was a little bit jarring, all the Spanish.
Yeah, it was. Why was it jarring for you?
I know some people were very happy that there weren't subtitles, and usually I'm very happy because subtitles immediately other a language if it's not a foreign film. Because if it's entirely in English and suddenly there's Spanish and you put subtitles, it immediately makes people understand that this is something different. This is not the norm. But with this one, I've spoken to people that don't speak Spanish and they tell me that they got the context, but I really do wish that there had been a bridge between what they were saying and people that don't speak the language, because there were moments where I wanted people to understand what they were saying, because there were moments where like Anita was speaking from a place of hurt, or Bernardo, and they were like actually going deep into their struggles, and you don't hear that. You don't understand what they're saying if you don't speak the language. And it gives a lot of context to why they're feeling the way that they are. And there's also the assumption that all Latinos speak Spanish, and not all Latinos speak Spanish. So you're already isolating a part of the community that doesn't speak the language.
Absolutely agree.
And if it's a movie for us, I wish it would have been more accessible in that way.
Honestly, this is just a great case study for why there should just be subtitles on everything.
Yes, there should be subtitles on everything. That's basically that's what we should end the conversation on, because it's more accessible. It's all about accessibility, especially this film that just code switches so much. And they really tried to make it more accurate and more like authentic, but at that point it just felt like a very big division between what they wanted it to be and what they thought it was.
Do you think that we, needed a remake? Do you feel like this, did a better job? This helped Puerto Rican representation in any way? Or what do you think?
It did not help Puerto Rican representation in any way. I think it does bring awareness to some things, but it won't do the work unless people actually put in the effort and do their research. I don't think we needed a remake, but I do think this one is better than the 1961 version, because it's basically...
No brown face?
Yeah, no brown face. It's quote unquote less racist than the first one, which we need to acknowledge that the first one was very racist. But I agree so much with your reaction. I love the way you worded it, because it is true. It glamorizes racism, microaggressions, and discrimination. Whereas the first Romeo and Juliet, like the original, the Willie Shakespeare's version, It was a duality between class and nobility and title. Meanwhile, here we're focusing on race and discrimination and backgrounds and cultures. So it's very hard to sympathize.
I think West Side Story as a whole we glamorized. You are talking about immigrants, and you're talking about, go back to your country, and you're talking about all these things that technically don't make sense for Puerto
Yeah.
Ricans at all. If this was, if this story was about, a different Latino culture, sure, then it completely makes sense. But it doesn't make sense for Puerto Ricans, and then it feels like it's perpetuating the stereotype of like, oh well, all people that are Latino are immigrants or are this or are that, and it's not accurate. Like we've said, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Like
Yeah.
you are a US citizen. So, it's ironic to hear, the characters that are supposed to be like the Polish, jet gang members and go back to your country. It's like, but you're Polish. So you're technically the immigrant. The person who's from Puerto Rico is from the United States and they're a citizen. Then it's like, well, then should we not have a story about Puerto Rican representation? It's like, well, no, I mean, that's great that we have a story that wants to focus on Puerto Ricans, but then when it's all wrong information. I was talking to family members that, grew up back then, and they were like, how kind of now, if you're, a Latino, people just assume, all right, you must be Mexican, right? Back then, if you were Latino, people just assumed you were Puerto Rican, and that was, what you were, people didn't know anything. And it just feels like, we're perpetuating this idea and not actually like learning the truth about like who are these people, what are their backgrounds, what does this really mean.
Yeah, I think it also just speaks to the specifics because, again, Spielberg is promoting this as a Latino film or Latina. And the thing is that while most experiences, I would say, like, are people that travel here, specifically like New York, from other countries, again, it's a Puerto Rican story. So you have to acknowledge the fact that there is a violent history that affected Puerto Rico because first it was like we were part of Spain, then we had like freedom for like a day, and then we became part of the United States. So it's just interesting the fact that they still ignored that.
Like you said, this is being touted as a Latino film, but really this was supposed to be about Puerto Ricans. And you have like, you have some Puerto Ricans in the background. You have like one or two Puerto Ricans that are leading the film. But, it just kind of makes you think, if this is a story that's centered on that experience, why can't certain lead characters also continue to be of that experience, and then you see like Being the Ricardos, which has Javier Bardem, a Spanish man playing a Cuban man. And it's sort of like, but if your whole like story is centered on that experience of being a Cuban man, of being a Puerto Rican woman, why is it so hard to find that person to represent that? Yeah, actors can play any role, but there is like that authenticity sometimes that can be missing. Like we see when a film or a script or whatever, is about Puerto Ricans and written by only white men, that, it's missing that authenticity, and you have to have people come in and help change that. So do you think that there's like, I don't know, an issue there?
It is definitely one of those moments where this conversation keeps popping up where can we play characters from other backgrounds? Like if you're Puerto Rican, can you play a Cuban? I mean, J-Lo played Selena. So it's a tale as old as time as to what we can do. I think that at this moment, West Side Story is such a touchy subject, and it would have been so nice to have seen a Puerto Rican play Maria. And like Rachel is very talented. I loved her singing in this film. But I did feel a little bit of sadness because I know so many people that did audition for the role. They held auditions on the island as well as here in New York for Puerto Rican specifically. So I know, like, somos Puerto Riqueño. We're super talented. I know there are people out there that can sing, dance, and act. And just this excuse that we couldn't find anyone that was Puerto Rican that could do all three, just it's I don't buy it. I just feel that you couldn't find someone that was what you thought you needed, not what we deserved maybe. So I think that's why they're trying to make up for it with everything else, especially like again including that Pedro Albizu Campo quote, La Borinqueña, talking about citizenship even if it was from the perspective of the white gang. Like it was, I hate calling them Easter eggs, but it didn't really feel like Puerto Rican Easter eggs across the film. Like parts of our culture dropped in different moments. just to prove like, hey, we did do our research, we did do these things. But I really do think we would have benefited from a Puerto Rican Maria. I think that would have made a lot of people happy.
Going back to that original movie, there was like one Puerto Rican in there, her in brown face. I mean, incredible performance. It makes me think, like, has West Side Story, like, does it feel like a little bit minstrel-like in the fact that we have this story that, you know, we're trying to make work despite the fact that the representation, it hasn't been there in the past. You know, the fact that we have to put people in brown face in the original film, and the fact that, like, going into this new film, it's like, okay, can we put band-aids on this? And it's like, well, why do we keep bringing this story back? There are a lot of different tellings of Romeo and Juliet. This is just one of them, and it feels like one that, you know, you want to be proud of, because it's like, oh, the Puerto Rican people, but then it's like, but you're still not doing it in a way that, you know, feels accurate, or that feels like it represents us in a good way. Like, after watching this movie, I felt like, is there just something inherently in this story of, like, that just doesn't work?
Is that problem of trying to promote it as a Latina story when clearly it's not? Like, with all due respect, this film isn't for us. This film isn't for Puerto Ricans. This film is for a primordially white audience. I don't think it is for us, and we should stop promoting it as such, because it's not. A lot of the comments and reviews that came out at first after the premiere in New York was, I didn't think Spielberg could do it, but this is better than the original. And I'm like, I think it would be very easy to make this better than the original.
Is it just the fact that we actually cast Latinos in Latino roles that make it a step up? That's, I mean, which is
literally it.
Like, it's such a minimal thing.
There's also the difference between, like, we are all part of Latin America, but there is a difference between the experiences in South America versus the experiences in the Caribbean. So if you weren't going to cast Puerto Ricans for the main roles, at least cast Caribeños. Because, for example, David Alvarez, he's of Cuban descent. So there is, because we are all connected, all of that, like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Puerto Rico, we were all connected at one point. So there is that descendance there. But that just proves that you just can't recreate our culture as easily as people think. It just felt like they were trying to criticize the past 4 years that we've had through this film. But then again, it brings up that conversation of Puerto Rican experience not being the same or a universal experience for all Latinos during these past 4 years. Because we do have a privilege, we do have that U.S. citizenship. And even though, again, it was a consequence or a result of that violence and that colonization, we do have to admit that we can travel freely and we have less repercussions compared to other cultures and other people that come here and try to make a living here. We have it much easier in that sense. So also to try to rope us in that sense kind of diminishes also the struggles that other cultures have when it comes to trying to make a living here.
To wrap things up, is there anything else you want to add that we haven't talked about yet? And what are your final thoughts on West Side Story 2021?
I will say, because people think that I hate this film, I think, I'm gonna be honest, like, I am a fair critic. I think it was well made. I think it's one of Spielberg's best work in the past 10 years. You can tell that he really loves the musical. I don't know why, but you can tell. And he puts so much passion into every shot. And there were some moments where I was like, that is great camera work. You are really putting, like, you can tell that he really did care. The reason it improves on the first one is because you are patching up those rough spots. And that just leads me to say that this remake wasn't necessary. Is it well made? Yes. Is it a good film? Yes. Is it authentic? I do not believe it is. You can't recreate the love and pride that we feel as Puerto Ricans if you're not Puerto Rican, because our experience is so specific. I think people should give it a chance. I think it's a well-made film. If you are interested, you'll probably like it. If you are looking for it for Latino representation and Puerto Rican representation, it is not that.
I agree. I think, you know, when it comes to the music and the cinematography and the, you know, the costumes and the dancing, all like the production type things, it's really well made. It's beautiful. But when it comes to, you know, certain performances not quite hitting, when it comes to the way that, you know, just the fact that like Puerto Ricans are continue to be, you know, all Latinos really are continuing to be lumped into this one category when we're not a monolith, I think perpetuates those stereotypes that don't really make sense.
I think it comes down to that. The representation is not there. It's
Yeah,
not a Puerto Rican film. It's not a Latina film. It's simply a musical.
Thank you so much, Josie, for joining me. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, because this was a great conversation. And you can find me at the Josie Marie on Twitter and Letterboxd, and you can find Film Posers at Film Posers on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
For those of you who have checked out West Side Story, leave a comment down below and let us know your thoughts. And if you haven't yet, you know, maybe check it out. Let us know what you think. Consider subscribing if you like my videos, and if you want to talk more TV and movies with me outside of the comments section, check out the exclusive Discord available on my Patreon at patreon.com/kmaldo. If you like this one, you can check out more of my videos right over here. See ya!